Hello, so we're covering Epicureanism again, except that this time we're looking at the letter to Menoceus. So, more specifically, to Epicurus's letter to Menoceus. Menoceus is a student of Epicurus, and see this letter as a way of urging Menoceus to be a better person and hence helping us be better people. And so, for the ancients, philosophy was always a way to lead a better life. So it was therapeutic in that sense. And in leading a better life, we could then see that the telos, the aim of getting us to be happier people, to lead a more pleasurable life away from pain. Okay, and so in that sense, Epicureanism is practical. So it's a practical philosophy, and that's you get that sense in this letter in the way that he's helping Menoceus to think of leading a virtuous life and what that means. And so here are some tips on leading a virtuous life, what to do, right? And so one of his first tips is basically this idea that one is never too young and likewise never too old. In other words, the time is always right to study philosophy because we could always use the study of philosophy not only to understand life, but also likewise to understand what is leading up to death as well. So having a better life as a way of considering ourselves as mortal creatures is a way of becoming virtuous for Epicurus, right? And so he then indicates that these points on the gods. So always remember too that Epicurus was basing his philosophy on empiricism, and so because he's an atomist and he is empirical, everything that he writes about has to do with this basis of sensation in the way that we're considering things. It gets a little confusing in terms of how he's understanding gods and likewise the spirit, but always know that there's this distinction that he's making between empirical reality and likewise spiritual reality. But even though he favors empiricism, he still believes in the gods, and so he's considering this way that we could be smarter in our attitude toward the gods. So it is impious he who denies the gods to many, rather he who attributes the gods the beliefs of the many. So it's better it's better to think of the problem in the way that we're considering the gods by way of attributing our own ideas onto the gods, and that attribution of ideas onto the gods brings us a lot of suffering, is his point. And so in other words, he's advising Menoceus to avoid doing this. So the best way to lead a better life is to not attribute all these ideas of your own and the idea of the masses onto what it is that you understand about what the gods believe. You're going to be better off to do that. You're going to have a better life as a result by not doing that, okay? And this is because the gods cannot be known by sensation, and so let's be careful not to attribute our own sensations and our own understanding of the world to that of the gods, okay? So then one of our most important points has to do with this idea of Epicurus as an empiricist. And so because he's an empiricist, he believes in a soul, but he believes that that soul dies with the body. And so that the soul dies with the body then should be bringing us some comfort, is really his idea. That, in other words, we should avoid the pain in our dread toward death, to know that when we die, that is the end of sensation, it is the end of experience, and because it is the end of experience, we should therefore consider death to be nothing to us. And so when he writes, death is nothing to us, he's basically trying to say, when you die, you're lacking sensation and therefore it's nothing, so don't lose sweat over it. Don't dread it. Don't let it give you pain in this lifetime, looking toward death and thinking that death is going to be something terrible, but rather think nothing of it, because it's going to just simply be the lack of sensation. When we die, our atoms disperse and we become part of the earth, and as a result, we should think nothing of it. And so that's his way of considering this idea of death is nothing to us. And so that shows us his empirical convictions, and likewise his way of getting us to lead a better life by avoiding pain, and avoiding the pain of thinking death is going to be something terrible. And so instead, no, it's going to be the lack of sensation, so why worry about it, is basically his point, right? And so we're always seeing the removal of pain as the gold standard toward leading a better life, toward being a virtuous person, okay? And so that's getting us to the simple life, okay? And so he always wants us, he's a hedonist, but always understand that his aim of pleasure is one of a life of higher order pleasures, not carnal, not aiming toward carnal pleasures, because carnal pleasures bring us a lot of pain in life, right? And so we want to reduce the pain by seeking higher order pleasures and understanding that our time on earth is limited, and so we should live a life of pleasure as a result, and that life should be a simple life. It's not really clear if Epicureans are really ascetics, but it does sound like this does tend towards some kind of ascetic practice as well. And so he also points out that we want to aim toward sober reasoning that banishes mere opinions, which also cause the great disturbance of the spirit. So in other words, that's sounds a lot like Socrates, right? That in other words, we want to get to clear thinking, sober reasoning, instead of being entrapped and pained by mere common opinion. So in other words, common opinion causes us a lot of pain, and so reasoning, sober reasoning, is going to get us out of that, is what his proposal is. And so that sober reasoning is knowing that when we die, experience and sensation dies, and therefore we should think nothing of it, and so that should give us comfort, okay? So remember that his approach is highly rational as well, interestingly enough. And so as he ends the letter, he makes points on prudence, and so always understand prudence as one of the highest ethical principles in Epicureanism. In other words, temperance, or control over one's appetites, control over how one seeks pleasure to favor a hierarchy of pleasures that are reasonable, that lead us to a happy life, okay? So prudence is the highest virtue that is going to lead us to a happy life, instead of worshiping chance. So in other words, leading a life where you're just not focused on how to be virtuous, but rather you're just going where pleasure leads you, I think is what he's pointing out as far as leading this life of chance, leading your life to chance. Instead, you should be seeking a simpler life and one that is geared toward prudence, right? In other words, prudent control, okay? So prudent practice is going to get us away from the pain of life and into something that is more pleasurable, which is the virtuous life, okay? And so consider these things and be wise. Thank you. Bye-bye.